Welcome back to the workbench, guys. Today we're going to be working on another very cool prototype. Here you can see I just recently purchased this really nice Intermountain Custom Run PWRS CNO covered hopper. This is a really cool model, and I actually got this on eBay for, get this, $20 free shipping. As soon as I saw it, I bought it instantly. There's the box. Very, very cool. I was super excited to get this car. I've wanted a Chessie hopper for a while, and I figured this would make an excellent weathering video because I'm going to be beating the crap out of this thing, as you can probably imagine. Here I'm just doing my preliminary inspection of the car out of the box, and so far so good. I'm pretty satisfied with the detailing. These Intermountain cars are pretty good out of the box. The detail is pretty good overall. I like the detail on the bays. The trucks are kind of crappy on this particular car, but other than that, I can probably replace those down the road with tangent trucks. I will be replacing the top hatch because I have a smooth hatch prototype that I want to switch this to, so I will be changing that out. That's why I'm pointing this out here. Other than that, everything on this model stock will work, and I'm pretty satisfied with the quality of the model. We'll be able to do quite a bit of work to this thing, and we'll really make it look nice. On to prototype reference here. So what we're going to be looking at is not an exact car number I'm trying to replicate, but rather a similar Chessie prototype that we can kind of point to as an example of the kind of weather that you see on this car. Notice the heavy grime. Notice how the yellow has oranged out, and then it gets this really heavy layer of grime, and a lot of times heavy rust streaking down the sides. You get the weld seams filled in quite a bit, the blue darkens quite a bit. Of course, lots of grime on the underbays, tons of rust on the roof. So this car has a little bit of everything on it, and we're going to be using a multitude of different techniques and effects to create the weathering for this particular model. Onto the paint tint. As I mentioned, these cars generally start to orange out regardless of what kind of prototype it is, a 4750, an ACF prototype. I want to try to recreate an orange tint, and as you can see, I have two colors that I've picked for this to spray with the airbrush. I have chosen an earth brown and an orange Anita's acrylic, and I'm going to be mixing this with 70% isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to be putting it in my little airbrush canister. My airbrush is set at 40 psi, and if we take a look at that wash, you can see the color that I've created. It's kind of this putrid looking orange brown color, and I've just basically mixed this in with the alcohol as shown here, and I made sure it was a nice thin wash, about the consistency of skim milk. I do a couple test sprays to just make sure it's good, and then I go ahead and transfer the airbrush over to the model for spray. Basically what I do, I start at the top of the car. I work in the smallest area just to kind of get an idea and a feel of how the paint's going to work out for me. And I just do a couple different passes to start off. You can see I'm just working around the area where the hatch would be, and it's nice that we were able to take that hatch off because it makes it a little bit easier to work this area in. Once I do that, then I'll go down the side of the car. I'll work around the walkway supports, as you can see here. I just very carefully go in. The thing when working around roof walk supports, regardless of the prototype, you got to be very careful to hit it at different angles. If you don't, you end up getting little shadows, and it's very unrealistic. So it's very crucial that as you're going down the side of the car, you make sure that you have very even paint coverage. Notice that I'm going down the side of the car. I'm making smooth, even passes all the way down, and I'm taking the airbrush off the car before I complete my spray. This, basically, the reason I do this is to prevent any paint buildup on the ends, specifically as the airbrush passes over. You start to get these weird shadows if you just let the paint build up on the ends. So it's very key that you keep the airbrush moving off the model as you complete your pass. Here you can see again I'm just going back in, and I'll start layering it a little bit more. I'm not going to be working on the blue here, just for the record. I'm only working on the yellow here. And again, I'll start moving the airbrush and other little patterns here just to even the paint out a little bit. As you can see, it's very hard to see on camera, but we do have a nice orange tint now to the paint, and compared to the opposite side, you can see the difference here, so I'm pretty satisfied with this. So I'll go ahead and finish the opposite side and seal this with dull coat. Next up, we're going to be doing the base layer of grime, and this is going to be the fun part here. Again, we're going to be using the airbrush. I'm using straight earth brown acrylic mixed with my 70% isopropyl alcohol here. I very carefully diluted the paint, mixed it in, and here you can see I'm hooking it up to the airbrush and just doing some very basic test sprays to just make sure everything's nice and smooth. Then I'll transfer the airbrush back over to the model, and just like the tint, I'm going to start at the top, working my way over the top of the car just like this, hitting up the roof walk area, working down that entire length. Just making sure I get all that grime built in, especially at the top there where it's going to really be heavily built up. Here you can see in this transitional shot of the progress, you can see how I've blended that grime out, but notice how there's a very distinct layer of grime at the top of the car compared to the base of the car. Again, I've made up a little bit more acrylic mix here, and I'm now going to be hitting up the underbody just because I have the paint out and the airbrush out. I wanted to go ahead and get one layer to get me started here. I will be going back and adding more layers to the underbody. You guys pretty much should be aware how I usually treat the underbodies here. I don't go into so much detail that it's just outrageous, but I do like to make sure everything's painted at least. So I'll go in with a brown layer, maybe mix with some black sometimes depending on the color. And I'll just go in and really heavily lay out the rust on the base. I'll work around the coupler pockets, around the bolsters, because those are going to be the areas where a lot of that rust is going to be concentrated. Remember, you got a lot of grime coming up off those wheels and off those trucks, and a lot of that starts to rust, even around the underbase too. Even in the center, there's still a lot of rust, so I'm really working that acrylic mix over that. Next is the graffiti. And I'm doing the graffiti now because I want to actually model some graffiti that's kind of been weathered into the side of the car a little bit. What I'm doing here to start is I'm using straight acrylic paint. This is Anita's flat black. Excuse me, guys. And you can see I'm just doing a very basic outline to start. I'm using a thin brush to just very carefully apply this, and I've chosen graffiti from another Chessie prototype. I forget the exact car I got this off of, but I'm just going in and I'm doing a very basic outline to start. It's slow, tedious work at first, but once you get going, you get the hang of it pretty quickly. For any of you guys who want to try graffiti at first, I recommend doing a basic trace outline using a mechanical pencil or any kind of pencil like that to do your border, and then go back in with the paint, and then you can just very carefully fill it in. You can see very quickly, in about 20 minutes, I've been able to compress this, but now I'm switching over to white acrylic to do the borders and highlights. It's very common for graffiti to have multiple layers of paint applied and not just one color. Usually they'll have a border, they'll have highlights, they'll have outlines, things like that. So the white acrylic is important here. It's just going to help me fill in the outline, and I'm just very carefully going in and making sure everything is nice and even and smooth, and I don't have any rough edges. I'm just trying to be very careful, and I'm just going kind of slow here. You can see I start working on one outline at a time, one letter at a time, all the way down the side of the car. Onto an overhead shot here, and you'll have to excuse me, it is upside down, but I didn't want to have a shot like this with my head and my hands in the way, and then having a tripod between my legs also doesn't help. I needed to be able to get in here and get some detail shots. So what I'm doing now is I've switched to all white acrylic, and what I'm doing is the exact same way that I painted the opposite graffiti piece, but I'm just using white acrylic now. I'm doing my basic outline, and I'm just very carefully transitioning the paint out into the directions I need it to go, and then I just very carefully finish my outlines, and then I'll start filling it in with one layer of paint, and it's non-diluted acrylic here. This is full strength right out of the bottle. Working down the side of the car, you can see it's starting to take more shape here. You can see it's a little rough at first, especially with colors like white. Yellow is really bad, red is really bad, orange is bad. All you got to do here is do your basic fill-in, and then you can gradually add thinner washes of white paint over, and it actually fills in a little bit better. You do a thinner layer of acrylic paint, and then it also helps to blend some of those brush streaks out over time, and it'll help fill in this entire piece a little bit quicker, and it'll also make it look a little bit smoother. But it's very easy to do. It's really not that hard. And you can see this is a relatively long, larger piece compared to the first one. This takes up quite a large corner of the car, but we're getting it done here. And again, this probably took about an hour after I got everything completely painted. Here in this shot, I'm going in and I'm adding the black outline to this piece, starting in the corner there, and then I'm slowly just carefully going in and doing the outline until I'm satisfied. Now I'm doing another outline to the black background border there, and that's another common effect that you see. All I'm doing again is using a very fine tip Atlas brush. I believe it's a 10.0 brush by Atlas. I love these things for graffiti. They just do a fantastic job for outlines. And if we look at the graffiti now, you can see what I've been able to basically accomplish. If we look at the side of the car, you have it nicely filled in, and it looks superb. This kind of graffiti is super easy to do. This is really a good style of artwork to get started with if you guys want to learn graffiti. Next up, we're going to start doing some real heavy rust work. We're going to be doing oil work next. And we've done our base layer of the acrylic work with the airbrush, but now we need to go in and do brush work to actually accomplish the rest that we need for this particular prototype. You can see I have a selection of brushes there. The acrylic, or not the acrylic, but the oil I'm using first is burnt umber. This is my water mixable oil. And I almost always use straight, clean strip paint thinner when I dilute the paint down. You can see I have it in a little cap here next to my mixing paper. I have a paper towel or a napkin handy, something like that, to just help me gather and blotch out some of that thinner as I go. To start off, I'm using full strength artist oil, and I'm just going and I'm very carefully working that paint in around the roof walk to start. Remember, all this on the top of the car is going to be very rusty. So what I'm doing is I'm going in with a smaller brush and I'm applying the oil, and once I get it to where I'm satisfied, then I'll go in with a larger flat bristle brush like this one here to go in and just lightly blend that paint out a little bit and take out some of the brush strokes. So it's a soft bristle brush, and as you can see in this next shot here, it helps to blend that paint out and also give it a little bit of a texture, which is pretty cool. And it looks super nice. Next up, we're going to be going in these roof walk supports. This is a little bit more of a tedious process, and you got to use flats mainly for this, just because it's very hard to get the paint in there with a larger brush. So I use the flats like the one I'm using here to just very carefully apply a diluted mixture of that water mixable oil, and I'm just starting to very carefully work it down the roof, sloping down there towards that top cord sill. And you can see I'm just going down in between one section at a time. Like I said, it's tedious, but once you get going, you get it pretty quickly. I'm just pulling that paint down as I go, and I will be doing multiple layers of this wash. On the ends, it's pretty much the same process. Again, pretty tedious. I'm not going to show the whole process here, but basically the idea is you try to build up the paint layers and you try to keep things relatively smooth. You just want to try to get the rust in where you need it to be in all those nooks and crannies. And a smaller brush like the one I'm holding here, it's a very basic, cheap craft acrylic brush, but these work great for this kind of weathering, especially on these finer ends where you have to work between railings and walkways and everything like that. And you can see I'm trying to keep the paint moving upwards. Now I'm switching up to the side here, and I'm going to be doing a very heavy wash of oil, and what I'm trying to accomplish here is going to be some very heavy rust streaking, but this is going to be the base wash. I have to have a base wash of grime here before I do anything else. So what I'm doing is I'm using another larger flat bristle brush, and I'm very carefully doing a heavy wash of the burnt umber. And you can see for the moment I'm kind of working it around that graffiti. I don't want to completely smother the graffiti in this rust yet. I will be weathering the graffiti specifically a different way, but right now I'm just trying to kind of work the paint around it and really just focus on the actual yellow on the car body, and very carefully and slowly working it down towards that blue sill. You can see I'm just working it around, just kind of feathering it out a little bit, just carefully blending it out and taking out some of those brush strokes to begin with here. And you can see I'm just kind of cleaning my brush now. I want to get some of that excess paint off. And with my brush, after I've dipped it in some thinner and cleaned it off a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and start smoothing that paint back out a little bit, because I want to, again, take a lot of those brush strokes out and just smooth this paint out a little bit to get it to where I need it to be. I want it to be relatively thin. I just want it to be able to tint the entire car body there to start with. Now you can see I'm just starting to pull that paint down just a little bit over that graffiti to go ahead and start applying a base wash over it. I will be doing some more detailed work to the graffiti, but I'm not too worried about the graffiti at this point. I'm just moreover worried about the actual car body. But I am pulling that paint down to smooth things out, and I'm just doing the very light wash over it for now. Nothing crazy, nothing special here. You can see it's just very basic brush strokes here, even though my hand gets in the way here sometimes. I'm just doing the basic brush strokes to smooth the paint out. Now the next step is going to be the heavy rust streaks. And this is a very interesting process here. I don't like trying to do this effect. It's very difficult to do at first. As you can see, I kind of struggle at first getting the paint exactly where I need it to be, but basically what I'm doing is I'm taking full strength artist oil here. Okay, this is full strength, it's non-diluted. I'm using another smaller craft brush to apply the paint in chunky, heavy layers, and I know this looks terrible, but you'll see what I'm doing here in a second. After I've applied the paint in where I need it to be, I then take another flat bristle brush loaded with thinner, and I'm just going to start at the top, and I'm going to start very carefully and slowly pulling that paint down. It's a little bit out of focus, but you can kind of see what the paint's starting to do here on the clean side of this model. It starts to pick up that heavier layer of oil, and as I work it down, it streaks it down a little bit and creates these more natural looking rust streaks. Granted, this is the first layer. We're still going to have to refine this a little bit, but it's a good primer layer of rust streaking. This is what it kind of looks like after we've accomplished that initial layer. And I want to also note here, I let this dry for about 2 days on both sides before I moved on to the next step. Once I was done with it, then I went in with dull coat and sprayed it all over the model to seal this initial layer of oil up in preparation for the next section. In the next section is the really fun part. This is something I really love to do, and it's hand painting the rust streak lines onto the car body. So we have the initial layer that we applied with washes, and here you can see I'm going to be using a very fine tip Atlas brush, and I'm going to be using the diluted burnt umber oil. And as the video shows here, I just basically start at the top with the oil, and then I very carefully start to just work it down one streak at a time. And you're thinking, oh my god, this has to take hours. Well, the thing is, once you get going, it actually only takes a few minutes per side to really get this technique done. It used to take me hours when I used to take my time with this, but after you've done a few models, you basically get to know how the paint works on a car, and you get a general feel of what the paint's going to do as you apply it. You know how to control your wash, you know how to control the motion of the brush to be able to create these streaks. If you're not 100% satisfied with them, you can always wipe them back off with a little bit of thinner on another brush and try again. But I'm pretty confident here, so again I'm just going in one line at a time. And some of these lines I'm going heavier, some I'm going lighter. You can see I'm also starting to just work it over that graffiti now too. I did not do this in that first layer of rust streaking. I made sure to clean those off. The rust streaking that I am putting over the graffiti is the hand painted. And I'm just very carefully working that over where I want it to go here. Now I'm doing dry grime, and after I let all of this oil work dry, again both sides, I then went back to the airbrush, and what I'm wanting to do is fill in a lot of that rust that I started to do, and I'm really trying to go for a dry, even rust now. The kind of rust that you see on a lot of these older Chessie hoppers where you'll have the rust streaks, but then you'll have at the top a large portion of it where it's just very flat, chunky, dry looking rust. And I'm using burnt umber and a little bit of earth brown mixed together in my airbrush here. And I'm just going in and I'm just filling in a lot of that paint work at the top, and I'm just very carefully starting to work it on and over the sill of the car there at the top as well. And then I'm actually going to pull it over the rust work that we did at the base and kind of around the top of that streaking there, because that's generally how you see this rust form at the top of the car there. It's a very interesting rust technique, but I've tried this before and it works out pretty well. I'm just smoothing it out here, as you can see. And now back to the underbody. While I have that paint in my canister, I'm going to go ahead and start finishing the underbody by applying the last layer of grime. Again, focused mainly around those under bays, mainly at the ends, a little bit here and there on that center bay, and in between the little bay sections there. Just kind of all over the place. I'm just sort of blending it out, adding individual little streaks and lines there. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a basic fill in here. And I'm also going to start working some of that acrylic over the ends again, kind of modeling the heavy pattern areas where the kick-up starts to streak up, kind of working it into the area between the end cage and the car body there on that slope sheet. Just working it in here in little areas and just also filling and fanning the paint out just a little bit. Next up, we're going to be doing the patches, and this is going to be a very important step here. I'm modeling a CSXT prototype here. I'm not modeling anything else. What I'm using is full-strength acrylic paint. I actually found a acrylic that at Hobby Lobby that matched CSX Tan. These cars are generally patched all kinds of ways, generally in the corner there. Here you can see the basic overview as well of the car before we start working on the patching on the sides. You can see I have done it on the ends here, and I've also installed the custom new hatch that I fabricated from styrene. But what I'm going to be doing is using this color here, and I'm going to be doing full strength. Just like the graffiti, basically, I come in here and I apply the outline of the patchwork. And again, I'm not modeling a specific prototype here. I'm actually choosing a very specific kind of model where I choose multiple prototypes for reference. So I'm just going in and again applying an outline with the full strength acrylic. I work it up and down the side of the car to get the basic outline very slowly. I try to get this as good as I can. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Oftentimes this patchwork is done very quickly, and it's definitely not perfect. But on a model in scale form, you want to try to keep it relatively straight and clean looking. I don't like rough looking patchwork on models. It's one of those things where it doesn't really translate very well in scale form, I should say. Here you can see I'm just starting to fill in that a little bit more, making the CNO number and the reporting mark disappear a little bit. Now, you guys are also probably wondering, well, why am I doing the patchwork now? It's not going to look right. It's going to look so clean. Well, we'll weather this over a little bit later. Here you can see after I apply the initial layer of acrylic paint, I then go back in and I've made a nice diluted wash of this paint color, and I'm going to very carefully go over that entire patch area in between the borders to just go ahead and fill it in. I want to try to keep this area as smooth as possible. That way it's easier to apply decals. And I'm also going to be doing some rust spots here. I'm also going to be applying a little bit of detail work. And these are going to be placards. The car I'm modeling is generally a kind of car that you see in phosphate service, and all these kinds of cars are placarded. So you can see I'm using some Detail Associates placards here that I got at a train show. I'm going to be cutting those out, and I've installed them on the model. Jumping ahead a little bit now, I've applied some decals where I needed them to be. I've applied a new COTS block, and I've applied the CSXT reporting marks. What I'm doing now is layering in oil and acrylic paint rust dots over my patchwork and over the base of the car. I want to model a couple different rust spots all over the side here. What I'm doing first is applying the acrylic work to do the base layer of the rust dot first. You can see I just layer it out very slowly. I just mix up a little bit of earth brown and black here. I apply it with a thin brush and just kind of work it all over the side of the car, just where I need it to be. Just adding a little bit more interest, a little bit more fun variety to this model. You can see I'm just working it just kind of randomly here. And again, I am using a couple different prototype photos to get a basic reference of where some of these rust spots gather. In the next shot here, what I'm doing now is I'm following behind with full strength burnt umber oil paint. And just like before, I'm applying it right over that rust dot that I painted previously with the acrylic. I'm going full strength, like I said, and I'm just very carefully adding the paint into the inside portion of that rust dot. I'm not trying to go outside of it at this point. Next up, I take a thin brush, mix with a little bit of thinner, and then I just go back over these rust spots before they completely dry up to pull some of that paint down and make a traditional looking rust spot. You can see it doesn't take much effort. You just do a nice gentle motion over those rust dots, and very quickly as you go down the side of the car you get some really nice looking rust dots relatively quickly. And you can do as many or as few of these as you want, but I will say once you get going it's very easy to overdo it. So I recommend starting off, only do a few rust dots at a time, see how they work out, and if you like them maybe add some more, but don't go overboard because it's very easy to do too many and then overdo the model. I'm just doing small little portions at a time here. On the opposite side here, I'm going to go ahead now and add a little bit of load spillage and a little bit of dust and grime to the underbase as well. Here I'm using some white acrylic, and I'm kind of dry brushing this with an artist brush here. I'm applying it all over the model basically, right on the underbase. At the top with the load spillage, this is the fun part, I'm applying this around the hatches, And you can see it's very light. All right, this is a very thin layer of paint. Most of it's been taken off on a paper towel. I just take the brush. I work around those hatches mostly to model the phosphate spillage. This is a phosphate car I'm modeling, so I want to have a lot of that bright, white, dusty, chalky kind of dust effect at the top there. The acrylic does a good job of this, but we are going to be enhancing this with actual material to make the realistic looking phosphate spillage. After I've let the paint dry, I then come back in and I'm going to apply full strength Elmer's white glue to the top of the car, and I'm doing this so I can actually take baking powder. This is going to be applied over the glue to look like the kind of phosphate spillage that you see generally on these cars. And you can see I just have some of it on the cap here. The baking powder is very fine. I'm just going in and I'm applying it directly over the areas where I applied the glue. You can see it does not look good at first at all. This is just applying it over that glue first. We'll then take it over a trash can. I'll blow most of this off, and only the areas that have glue on it are the areas where the powder will stick. And as you can see, we now have a completed model. From load spillage to rust dots to grime work and everything, this probably took about 15 hours, I'd say. And in natural lighting, it just looks fantastic. I should note that I did not apply powders to the underbody at this point when I took these photos, but later on I did apply some powders to make those pop a little bit more. But as you can see, with all these techniques combined, we created a very, very nice model. There you can see that really nice phosphate spillage, and I'm super happy with this model, and I thank you guys for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.